GMOs. You've probably heard of them before, right? You've probably seen them on labels, in advertisements, and in almost every store you've ever been in. But here's my question. Do you really know what they are? So now, before we get into the topic of GMOs and why they're so controversial, let's discuss the big question. What are GMOs? GMO stands for Genetically Modified Organism. The term GMO can be used to refer to multiple categories, including food, drugs, and animals. So let's start simple and let's break down the term itself. The first word is genetically, which implies that the process will involve genes. In this box, you can see 2 strands of DNA. DNA is self-replicating material in almost all living organisms and the primary carrier of genetic information. Now, inside the black circle is a gene. Genes are what build DNA and what code for every single part of a living thing. People, plants, pets, and stuff like fungi are all constructed based on their genetic code. Next, we have the word modified, which means a change or adjustment was made. In this case, a change was being made to the genes, which will alter the genetic makeup. Lastly, we have the word organism. An organism is a living thing. We will mainly be discussing plants and crops, but that's not all GMOs are limited to. Now, let's put it all together. Genetically modified organisms are organisms that have altered genes to change their genetic makeup and overall outcome. Okay, so now that we've established the overview of what GMOs are, let's talk about the science behind them. The first and most common method for creating GMOs involves introducing new DNA into an already existing genome using modified bacteria. The bacteria does not contain a nucleus, which is important. Unlike our DNA, the bacteria contains circular chromosomes and plasmids. Plasmids are tiny bits of DNA which are easily transmitted from one bacteria to the next, which is essential for altered genes to be passed on fast and in large quantities. A piece of DNA is oftentimes removed from the plasmid, modified, and then added back to the plasmid. The DNA is modified using techniques like CRISPR-Cas9. CRISPR is a new technology which picks out one specific gene and is able to cut a part of the gene, modify it, and paste it back into the original genome. The newly adapted gene is then what will be passed on from one DNA to the rest. Another common method involves crossbreeding of specific plants. The process of crossbreeding is done by choosing specific organisms with the desired traits and breeding them using different pollination techniques. The third commonly used technique uses mutations to permanently change DNA. This process is called mutagenesis, and this process basically induces mutations or DNA changes within the genome. This could be used to restrict undesired traits or create new positive traits to benefit the outcome of the crop. All 3 of these technologies are advancing every single day and are going to become increasingly popular as the years go on. Before we get into the pros and cons of GMOs, I want to put the world into perspective really quick. Imagine the blue circle is the size of the world. The pink line is the number of people in America, and the red line is the number of people who don't have enough food to be fed. There are over 8 billion people on our planet. 783 million of these people don't get enough food for adequate nutrition. A Science Direct Journal article estimates that 52.5% of deaths in young children worldwide are due to malnutrition. This pressing need for more food in the world is a big contribution to the growing industry of GMOs. According to the FDA, there are 3 major traits that are modified in order to increase crop yield. The first trait is that crops are resistant to insects that are prone to damaging them. This will increase the yield because the most harmful insects will no longer consume the crops at the same rate. The second trait often changed in GMOs is the tolerance to certain herbicides that may be used to control weeds. This will allow the crops to continue thriving even if the weeds must be dealt with. At times, genetically engineered crops can also be grown at places with unfavorable climate conditions, like droughts or dry soil. The final trait that is oftentimes modified affects the ability to contract certain plant viruses. These traits also lead to less money, less water waste, and less reduced carbon footprint. Modifying all 3 of these traits will seriously increase the crop yield and provide more food for our growing world. In addition to increased yield, GMOs can also lead to increased nutrition. Foods like rice are often genetically modified to contain greater nutritional value. High-poverty countries often lack certain vitamins and minerals, so implementing these into commonly eaten foods can save so many lives. Beta-carotene is a compound with excess vitamin A. This compound is frequently added to the genome of rice to help the increasing number of kids that go blind in high-poverty areas due to malnutrition. This is just one example of how GMOs can benefit the nutritional value of foods worldwide. As we discussed before, more than 10% of the world doesn't get enough food or adequate nutrition. With these methods of GMOs, the hunger rates could go down due to the increased production and increased nutrition. In addition to this, people often don't realize that GMOs are actually very beneficial to the environment. There are 6 reasons listed below why GMOs are beneficial to the environment. First, there will be a reduction in pesticides being used on the farms because GMO plants can be altered to be resistant to pests and diseases. This reduction in pesticide usage can mitigate environmental damage associated with pesticide runoff, which can harm waterways, soils, and non-target organisms. Secondly, if these crops are altered to have a higher yield, then they will make the same amount of yield on a much smaller plot of land. This may stop deforestation and help maintain the natural beauty and forests that we have left. With more room for forests, that leads to greater possibility for biodiversity and different animals to survive and thrive in the environments that they have left. GMOs can help lessen threats to biodiversity by increasing agriculture productivity on farmlands that we already have, and this will reduce the pressure to convert natural habitats into agricultural land. To add to this, less farming means less tilling, which is beneficial to soil, erosion, and waterways all around. More productive farming will also lead to a decreased use in water and a decreased use in machinery, which will save water and reduce greenhouse gases.
In addition to this, Jane Brody of the New York Times discussed safety. She explained various tests are done before the products become available to the public, and there are plenty of regulations on this science. Roughly 90% of scientists believe GMOs are safe. The fears of GMOs are all theoretical, as nothing has been proved harmful about them, but we know science is always subject to change.
Now that we have learned about some of the biggest benefits of GMOs, let's discuss some of the drawbacks. Although there has been an abundance of testing done on if GMOs are safe to consume, nobody can say for sure how they may affect people in the long term. Many individuals and organizations are concerned about the potential long-term health effects associated with consuming GMOs or their byproducts. It is thought that consuming genetically engineered foods may lead to the development of illness which are resistant to antibiotics. Furthermore, since these foods are recent inventions, their long-term impacts on health are still largely uncertain. As health effects are unknown, many people prefer to stay away from these foods. The second major con about GMOs involves the mixing of genes in an unnatural way. Many religions and cultures oppose such foods, viewing genetic manipulation as an unnatural method of food production. Additionally, many individuals are uneasy about the idea of transferring genes between different species. The process of cross-pollination may also harm other organisms in the environment, although unlikely. The new combination of genes could also be a problem for people with allergies, as there can be cross-contamination between different allergens, or even the possibility of new allergies being created in the process. Next, critics argue that GMOs can have unintentional ecological consequences, such as harming non-target organisms like beneficial insects and soil microbes. There are also concerns about the potential for GMO crops to spread their engineered genes to wild relatives, potentially leading to ecological disruption. GMO crops, particularly in large-scale industrial agriculture, can lead to a reduction in genetic diversity within crops. This loss of diversity can decrease resilience to pests, disease, and changing environmental conditions, potentially making agriculture systems more vulnerable in the long term. Finally, we have socio-economical impact. GMOs can also have socio-economical implications, particularly for small-scale farmers in developing countries. While GMOs may offer benefits such as increased yields or reduced costs of production, concerns exist about the long-term dependence on expensive seeds and associated technologies. Experts suggest that increasing genetically modified foods can lead to developing countries to rely more heavily on industrialized nations, potentially resulting in the control of food production by these nations in the future.
Now, after looking at both sides of the topic, we can better understand why there is a division between supporting GMOs and being against GMOs. It makes sense for people to have their own opinion on the topic, but just because there's division doesn't mean there needs to be controversy. The controversy surrounding this topic stems from misinformation and deception. This predominantly stems from the manufacturing and business side of things. Manufacturers refrain from disclosing adequate information on genetically modified food labels because of the concerns about potential negative impacts on their business. This information being withheld from the public is very unethical and can lead to public distrust. Now, let's break it down. First is labeling regulations. According to the US FDA, there are laws that require that if a food is genetically engineered, the information must be on packaging. With this, the labels need to be more understandable. Consumers want clear and transparent labeling of all products that they are purchasing. If someone is going to spend their money on a product, they should have the right to know what's in it so they can make informed purchases. These needs are oftentimes disregarded as labeling requirements vary in every country and region. GMO labeling can be optional in some places, which can affect consumers' choice and knowledge. Secondly, consumers are not properly educated. In general, the public needs to have a better understanding of what GMOs actually are. The basic knowledge we discussed in the first half of this video is not knowledge that everyone has, which can make this topic a lot more confusing, especially when it comes to the spread of false information. If someone who is not educated on the topic and is confidently told an opinion on the topic, they will most likely believe the information they are told. This can lead to misunderstanding as well as the spread of false information. To top these two things off, most companies just want money. Big companies take advantage of consumers by only showing what they want to show. If a company has a clientele that is predominantly anti-GMO, the company may try to make it not noticeable and unclear whether the product is genetically modified or not, which leads to deception. Now, how can we better handle this controversy? In order to improve the way this controversy is talked about, the public needs to be educated on the topic. This includes raising awareness about the science behind genetic modification, the regulatory processes governing GMOs, and the potential benefits and risks associated with their use. Educated consumers are better equipped to evaluate the information provided to make informed decisions about GMOs. This would also involve making information about GMOs readily available to consumers. This may be done by providing information about the use of GMOs in food production, the specific traits that have been genetically modified, and any health and environmental implications associated with the GMOs. Providing access to reliable information empowers consumers to make choices that match their values and lifestyles. With this gap between producers and consumers being filled, there will be a decrease in confusion and misinformation. In addition to this, there needs to be more regulation and guidelines for companies regarding labeling. Consumers deserve to know what they are buying and what they are putting in their own and their families' bodies. Better labels would improve information on all nutrition facts and any processing information. Regulations implemented by the government to make sure these requirements are met are essential. To wrap this all up, these three major factors, better education, implementation of new regulations, and more encompassing and understandable labeling, will all lead to less controversy surrounding GMOs. If people are able to better understand the topic and the science around it, there will be more positive culture surrounding the subject, and this will lead to better conversation. There will still be a divide between the people that are for and against GMOs after proper education, which is totally okay. But if people are properly educated, at least there will be less of a chance for misinformation, deception, and confusion. If companies are required to share more consistent information, consumers will be more comfortable and confident with what they buy. Better education, more labeling, and enforced regulations will lead to less controversial conversations surrounding GMOs.